A beautiful evening to you, and we're glad to have you join us on another episode of Reading for Pleasure, where we make book reading pleasurable. And it's coming to you on Oluyole 98.5 FM Ibadan. My name is Jamila Elegbede. The producer is Idowu Shekoni. And tonight we'll be working with Olawumi Oroshola. It promises to be another interesting read, as always. In case this is your first time joining in on the program, Reading for Pleasure comes up every Tuesday from 7 to 8 p.m. Reading for Pleasure is also on Facebook at Reading for Pleasure 98.5. So if you haven't done that already, do like our page. You can also drop your comments there. And remember to share a post and tell others about the page and this program so that together we can keep the reading culture alive. So, we are done with the book Dividends of Greed by Lucas Olabode and published by Craft Books Limited. While we prepare to bring the answers to you and prepare you for our next interesting read, we'll be taking some poems, and that's what we'll be doing together tonight. Yes, we'll be doing that together tonight because it's not something I can do all by myself. Yes, thank you so much for always. So tonight we are taking a poem. It is from the book Perry, The Diary of a Pensive Poet. And this is an anthology or a collection of poems written by Abu Monday Inejo. It's an abstract expression of the poet's innermost desires, with titles mostly arranged according to the days of the week. The collection presents themes such as passion, pain, love, anger, and change vis-a-vis the passionate's desire for growth in every facet of life. This week, we follow the poet on his journey through a Saturday as he pours out his heartfelt musings, which begins with a note: "Look not only at the words, but the lines. It is all connected." Dear Saturday, I have tried to rid me of thoughts that rape courage. I have tried to, like ants, gather this sweet force, but like its queen, I remain static and afraid to take a dive from this pointy cliff into a sea that I know not anything about. On this cliff, I preen closely to see a reflection of me, but I fear I may fall accidentally into my fear. I stood there, arms akimbo, as the air whispered into my ears stories of lovers and misconstrued affairs. Like any missive, it left me aloft with a tipsy tip of a drunkard dozed in his own dart. Take the dive, but make sure it is impalling. It said, this old sage is a virgin in this territory. I know why I should take this dive, but how? How do I jump? What if it turns out to be a rock? Answer me these questions. You never can tell the direction of the air until you feel it. You can never tell the temperature of the sea until you take this dive. Just dive, it said. So that's the poem, Dear Saturday. Before we do the analysis, I'll take it one more time. Dear Saturday, I have tried to rid me of thoughts that rape courage. I have tried to, like ants, gathered this sweet force. But like its queen, I remained static and afraid to take a dive from this pointy cliff into a sea that I know not anything about. On this cliff, I preen closely to see a reflection of me, but I fear I may fall accidentally into my fear. I stood there, arms akimbo, as the air whispered into my ears stories of lovers and misconstrued affairs. Like any missive, it left me aloft with a tipsy tip of a drunkard dozed in his own dart. Take the dive, but make sure it is impalling. It said, this old sage is a virgin in this territory. I know why I should take this dive, but how? How do I jump? What if it turns out to be a rock? Answer me these questions. You never can tell the direction of the air until you feel it. You can never tell the temperature of the sea until you take this dive. Just dive, it said. We'll now do the analysis of what you would call the literary appreciation of the poem. In the poem, we see the theme of uncertainty and the theme of the fear of the unknown. The subject matter is life as a risky endeavor, with a curious title that begins this expression on the last day of the week, perhaps in a bid to signal the poet's bemused state. The fourth stanza poem, Dear Saturday, reveals the persona as an anxious and indecisive person, afraid to take the leap into the future that awaits him for fear of the unknown. Now, this reality is well captured in the last 3 lines of the first stanza, where the poet says, I remain static and afraid to take a dive from this pointy cliff into the sea that I know not anything about. His description of his state, represented as a pointy cliff, shows his situation as precarious and risky, just as his use of the unfathomable sea, said to be the last frontier whose mysteries man needs to unravel, as a metaphor to represent the unknown which he fears, speaks of the apprehension which keeps him in the state of indecision. Also, as a queen in a colony of ants, he longs to venture beyond his fears, but is grounded by limiting thoughts which continue to assault his mind after endless contemplations that defy his attempts to be courageous. In stanza 2, we discover that the persona's pensive state is informed by his romantic experiences. Well, having been burnt in the past, his contemplations only serve to heighten his fear, made worse by tales of romantic entanglements, revealing just how intimidating our fears can become when we focus on it or on them, feed on them, or give them too much attention over and above the positive side of things. So, in lines 3 and 4 of the stanza, that is in stanza 2, he stood there helplessly, arms akimbo, as the air, which we can also say represents his thoughts, whispered stories of lovers and misconstrued affairs. The poet soon became befuddled and confused by his contemplations, which urged him in stanza 3, line 3, to take the dive, but make sure it is impelling. An expression which signals an exasperation to damn the consequences for a pessimistic assurance of a guaranteed negative outcome, even as he realizes that his collective experiences have failed to serve him in his perplexity. He felt naive and inexperienced, and this prompted his exclamation in line 4 of stanza 3. This old sage is a virgin in this territory. In the first line of the last stanza, the persona admits that he knows why he should take the dive in the face of his fear of an unfavorable outcome. He therefore turns to the air, the imaginary listener, in the following couple of lines and asks, "How do I jump? What if it turns out to be a rock?" The air, or do we say the voice, answers in the last lines of the poem, "You never can tell the direction of the air until you feel it. You can never tell the temperature of the sea until you take this dive." Ending with an imperative admonition to just take the plunge. Just dive, it says, in a call to action, in spite of the crippling fear of the unknown. Now let's look at the diction employed in writing the poem, Dear Saturday. The language of the poem marks it out as targeted at the educated audience, as some of the words would be unfamiliar and difficult for the uneducated to understand, while the choice of the pronoun I makes it clear from the first stanza that the speaker is the poet himself. The extensive use of appropriate registers associated with nature makes the whole scenario quite graphic and helps us to experience the pensive mood of the poet, just as the use of rhetorical questions in the last stanza suggests the persona's awareness of his situation and need for help. The use of words such as static, preen, misconstrued, and impulling, which are difficult for the average person to grasp without recourse to finding out their denotative meaning, speaks to this fact that it is meant for the educated. Now, let's look at the tone or the mood of the poem, Dear Saturday. While tone signifies an author's point of view, the mood of a piece of writing is the atmosphere of a piece and the overall feeling it conveys to the reader. So to this end, the mood of the poem is pensive, while the tone is hesitant, pessimistic, and imperative at the same time. The hesitant and pessimistic tone of the poem is suggested in the use of the words in the first two lines of the first stanza, accidentally, in line 2 of the second stanza, tipsy, in line 1 stanza 3, drunken and drunkard, in line 2 stanza 3, to describe the persona as being on the fence. In the same vein, words such as take and dive, and the phrases take the dive and just dive speak to an imperative tone. Now let's look at the literary devices employed. We have imagery, which refers to words or elements in the poem that appeal to our senses of sight, taste, smell, sound, and touch. These elements make ideas and concepts picturesque by creating relevant images in our minds. Such words or elements found in the poem include cliff, air, sea, rock, temperature, impalling, dart, whisper, old sage, virgin, and territory, which appeal to our sense of sight, hearing, and feeling, while creating images of the ideas conveyed by the poet. Now, enjambment, also known as run-on lines. This refers to the running over of a sentence from one verse or couplet into another, so that closely related words fall in different lines. Examples of this in the poem are found in, for instance, stanza 1, line 2 to 3, then line 4 to 5. Like ants gathered this sweet falls, but like its queen. See? Running on to the next line. And then we also have a dive from this pointy cliff into a sea that I know not anything about. Not in line 4, then running on to 5, anything about. We also have pun. Pun, P-U-N, pun. Pun refers to the usually humorous use of a word in such a way as to suggest two or more of its meanings or the meaning of another word similar in sound. We see this used in the poem in line 2, stanza 2, where the persona says, I fear I may fall accidentally into my fear. Fear I may fall accidentally into my fear. Playing on the word fear. Rhetorical question. Rhetorical question is used when questions are asked merely for effect with no answer expected. The poet used this when he asked in stanza 4, line 1 and 2, I know I should take this die, but how? How do I jump? What if it turns out to be a rock? We also have symbolism. This involves using symbols, especially investing things with a symbolic meaning by expressing it or by expressing the invisible or intangible by means of visible or sensuous representations. The poem does this by symbolizing life, its challenges and risk as a pointy cliff. Now let's look at some figures of speech used in the poem Dear Saturday. Metaphor. Metaphor is a figure of speech in which a word or phrase literally denotes that one kind of object or idea is used in place of another to suggest a likeness or analogy between them, as in drowning in money. It also refers to an object, activity, or idea treated as such. Examples of this in the poem are the word old sage, used to denote the agelessness of air, of life, the advisor, and the word virgin, used to convey the naivety, innocence, or inexperience of the advisor in the matters of the heart. The words are found in line 4 of stanza 3. Simile. Simile compares two unlike things, or compares two things that are often introduced by like or as in the expression cheeks like roses. An example of this is found in line 3 to 5 of stanza 1. But like its queen, I remain static and afraid to take a dive from this pointy cliff into a sea that I know not anything about. And in line 1 and 2 of stanza 3, like any missive, it left me aloft with a tipsy tip of a drunken drunkard dozed in his own dart. We also have personification, which means the representation of a thing or abstraction as a person or by the human form. In other words, it is the art of conferring human attributes on lifeless entities. An instance of this is found in the poem in stanza 2, lines 3 and 4. Stanza 2, lines 3 and 4, where the persona declares, "As the air whispered into my ears stories of lovers and misconstrued affairs." Here, whispering is the human attribute conferred on air, a lifeless substance or state of matter. Another figure of speech is apostrophe. Apostrophe. It means addressing a usually absent person or a usually personified thing rhetorically. Now, the personas are addressed to the air in "Answer me these questions" is an example of apostrophe. Alliteration, which means the repetition of usually initial consonant sounds in two or more neighboring words or syllables. And the poet used this where he said tipsy tip, tipsy tip in stanza 3, line 1, and drunken drunkard dozed in his own dart. Drunken drunkard dozed in his own dart in stanza 3, line 2. We also have oxymoron. Oxymoron, which is a combination of contradictory or incongruous words, such as cruel kindness, often placed side by side. An example is found in stanza 1, line 2 of the poem, where the expression sweet force was used, and then a virgin sage. And with that, we wrap up the analysis of, literary appreciation of the poem Dear Saturday, one of the poems in the collection of poems in the book Perry, The Diary of a Pensive Poet, written by Abu Monde Eneoju.